I've been in Vietnam all week with my historical travel society in South Vietnam, and I hadn't fully conceptualized how relatively short a period of time the French were in control of so-called Indochina, which now includes Vietnam. It was really 67 years or so, which of course is 67 years too long for European imperialism, but still their colonial period in Vietnam really lasted the life of one Vietnamese person. Specifically, it lasted the life of Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was born just 3 years, we think, after the French claimed all of French Indochina in 1887, and he lived and led the resistance to the French. He lived beyond that. He lived until 1969, just a few years till the end of the full Vietnam War, which led to the fully reunified and independent Vietnamese state. Of course, the Vietnamese people had been wanting independence from France, like, kind of forever, right? And Ho Chi Minh had been pushing specifically since around World War I, 1919. He actually went to France. He was in Paris at the Paris Peace Conference when all the kind of big four, including Woodrow Wilson, were sitting around talking about self-determination and the League of Nations and that sort of thing. And Ho Chi Minh and other colonized people were like, hey, what about colonized people of color? And of course, Wilson and others ignored them. But as far as like straight up fighting, we can really kind of pinpoint the start of the Vietnamese War for Independence in around 1945, or really the World War II era with the Japanese invasion of Indochina. Because this happens in the Philippines with the US colony and other parts of Asia and the Pacific, is when the Japanese invade, they kick out the European colonizers. And what that does is it gets rid of this European colonial influence for now. It unifies the people in, let's say, Vietnam to fight against the Japanese invasion. And then when Japan loses World War II and has to surrender, these previously colonized people are kind of left alone. And now the former European colonizers have to decide, are we gonna try to like re-subjugate the people, or are we just gonna allow them to be independent? The French make, I think, the mistake of saying, we're coming back. And so from around 1945 to 1954, it's the French Indochina War. It's the Vietnamese people led, especially in the north, but really kind of across Vietnam, against the French coming back. The Vietnamese people win in 1954 at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. We have the Geneva Accords that sit down and say, let's divide it into North and South, because that's worked so well in Korea, right? And from then on, it's basically, for the next decade or so, it is a civil war between North and South. You have the Diem government backed by the US in the South, which is really brutal. You have Ho Chi Minh in the North starting to build the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and Cambodia. And they're basically trying to figure out how to overthrow the South, bring about these elections that were promised, and reunify Vietnam. That shifts in around 1963 when the US starts to escalate its involvement. You have the assassination of Diem, the assassination of JFK leads to LBJ coming into office. And for around the next decade of this 30-year war, you have the Vietnam War, what the US people were directly involved in sending soldiers. That ends in 1973 with Nixon pulling out of Saigon. At that point, it's fairly obvious that the North is going to win, and officially this whole 30-year fight for independence ends in 1975. 50 years ago was the official reunification of Vietnam under the communist, now socialist government of Vietnam.